preemptive there. And secondly, I'm going to apologise as well for all the tangents I'm going to go off in the next 15 minutes. But we'll talk about collecting, or curating, and that comes from a place of love, obsessive and unhealthy love. And that's what turns this very industrial-looking, dormant mass of objects into an active, living archive. So what I talk about when I talk about curating is enlivening stuff, enlivening the objects that are in there. And how I do that is through making connections. It's about pulling on threads. So welcome to the Getty Images Holton Archive. In a nutshell, it's the history of images and its history in images. So a few figures. So you can see that it's an amalgamation, really. So the Holton was technically founded in 1947, but over through these many, many years, and you can see all these acquisitions and various sort of willed, sort of idiosyncratic images, we've built up around 80 million images altogether. And that's across 1,500 different collections. So I sort of interpret that as 1,500 different pairs of eyes. That's 1,500 tastes, habits, motivations, ethics, perspectives. And speaking of perspective, I just want to point out the 1854 date as well. We use that sort of as our founding year, and that's when the London Stereoscopic Company was formed. And I don't know if you know stereoscopes, they're those two images, and if you view them through this wonderful contraption, they sort of merge into this 3D image. So it's almost like Victorian VR. And we're very much of kindred spirits with the LSC. They were the first organisation to license images for a commercial use. So they're sort of like a 19th century Getty Images, really. And what they did is send their photographers out all over the world. You have these views of Australia, the Americas, Africa, Russia, and they were literally bringing them to the tips of people's noses if you see one of those stereoscopic viewers. So yeah, we have a lot of sort of kinship with them. But the library itself was founded in 1947, and we haven't really sort of changed a great deal over the last 71 years. Our sort of ethos is still very much the same. We've grown a little. You see that in a library of 5 million pictures, most things can be found, which I really enjoy. None of that sort of 21st century hyperbole. Most things. It's a reasonable guess. But sort of if you ever do have the chance to come to London and want to see the archive, you'll be able to see this sort of almost sort of an undercurrent of graphics history as well. You've got all these amazing typologies and fonts and branding in there as well, which I really enjoy. But sort of the library, I mean, we're a working sort of picture library now, although we're sort of owned by sort of Getty Images. Things are still pretty much going on the same as they always have done. But rather than prints being sent out in envelopes, it's JPEGs going out over the website. And really that sort of website allows us to make all of these images accessible to all. We're sort of haunted in a way. So it's, as you saw sort of in the first slide, we're very much a physical space, and we're looking after these physical objects. And so these black folders here from the Express collection, I still sort of look through those every day. The keystone boxes there, the handwriting on them, it all still exists. So you sort of feel all of these former archivists and librarians sort of looking over your shoulder. And we're very sort of, we're sort of grateful in a way actually that the library hasn't been relegated to sort of more private collections. So a lot of picture libraries back in the 1980s, they were all asset stripped and things were sold off separately, but the Holton archive has pretty much remained intact. And now, sort of more than ever, I think the story of the Holton has become just as fascinating. It's almost sort of a living museum as the collections within it. More stuff. And I love this one here. You can see the box of Fox photos being passed by the censor. So they were reduced in the war, obviously, and they had to go through various sort of levels of censorship before they were deemed publishable. But so when I was putting together this, I was thinking about what the difference was between an archive and a collection. And I think it's because I'm not really the collector, which is a strange thing. I'm almost the caretaker. It's sort of, with Getty images are sort of now having coming in 96, they're just the latest custodians. We very much think in in Vatican time. We're not just thinking decades or years, we're thinking centuries here. So you do get to wonder about what sort of fingerprints we'll be leaving on the collections. And I think all collectors in a way are leaving a legacy. You know, by collecting, essentially what you're doing is cheating death. And how do you cheat death? Mm-hmm. And I think it's very much about writing things down. And I think that's what all collectors are trying to do. They're trying to leave some sort of residue or trace of themselves. And to explore our archive, you have to navigate all these different indexing systems, 1,500 different indexing systems. And that's about deciphering not only the handwriting, as you can see here, but also the various taxonomies that people first apply to their own individual collections. So this on the right here is it's one of our major indexing systems. And it was devised by a guy in the 40s, Charles Gibbs Smith. He was this polymath genius fellow. And he devised all these subjects and cascaded down into these subsections. So this one here is misery, which is my favorite. So we've got misery slums, misery starvation, misery vagrancy. Apparently that one is there, but it does make me chuckle. So you feel a great responsibility in looking after these objects. It's that that physicality, that tactility, which lends them a aura, I guess. It can't be replicated anywhere else. And although we have getimages.com, which is wonderful, and you can see the images online, we put a lot of care and attention into looking after these images. So these are bundles of glass plate negatives wrapped up in brown paper and string. They perhaps haven't been opened in about 100 odd years. Now me and my boss are constantly rowing. I'm coming from a conservation point of view, and I want to rehouse all of these and see what they are. My boss, however, loves that magic. He loves that aura, that authenticity and that mystery of not knowing what's in there. So that's a constant tussle that we haven't really worked out as of yet. Reading the objects, so if you navigated the collections first of all, you know where you're going, and you have to think really laterally as well. So all those subject headings. I remember once I was looking for a 1940s wartime nursery. So I went to wartime, I went to juveniles, I went to nurseries, and I found a whole set of pictures of my local pub, which is lovely because that had been transformed into some sort of creche during the war years. So you've really got to think about how other people may have been categorising them and where they would have been held. And then when you get there, it's about reading the object itself. So I just love the fact that it's history before it was history here. This is Hitler with two lucky girls receiving his signature whilst he was on his holidays. It's before Hitler was really Hitler. It just astounds me. But the corner of the print there, that's to indicate that it was an index print and it wasn't to be removed from the library. Then you have the caption on there, and that's actually we have there's a lot of thought behind perhaps editing or censoring the captions, which I'm totally against, because that's rewriting the past. And if you do that, that just creates space to repeat the same mistakes again. So we like to include all of this information. And then you've got the agency stamps there as well. Picture libraries are really nebulous. There was constantly people lending prints back and forth, and you have to almost read it as a code. And that Keystone stamp in the corner there, that indicates it's from Keystone. Their offices were bombed in World War II. So actually their collection stops at around 1940 as well, which we only know that by that history in knowing the physical story of the collection. And then it's about unpacking the image itself once you've got past the object. So this is one of my favourite ones in the archive. It's some winner of a ball, I think, and he was the fancy dress winner, this witch and the devil. But if you look at the photography, it's Bradley and Rollison. William Rollison, he was a really interesting figure. He wrote this really misanthropic essay called The Dance of Death. And his brother was the notorious genius killer of San Francisco, a serial killer. So-called genius because his brain is the second largest specimen on record, and that's now in the Wilder Brain Collection over in the States. So that was his brother, the murderous criminal, And William Rolleston himself was also very good mates with Edward Muybridge, who you may recognise this image. He was the guy who famously sort of embarrassed centuries of art history by showing that horses actually run not like that, but like this. So William Rolleston testified at Muybridge's trial, actually, when he was accused of murdering his wife's lover. So just from this one tiny, kind of slightly sort of silly image, really, you get this wonderful sort of macabre story coming out of it. And I think that telling the story really does add value to those images. And it's something when I was studying art history, I was always told to ignore the biography, just focus on the object. But actually, particularly with photography, it's the maker that brings all this sort of mechanics and the chemistry to life. And Bert Hardy himself, this is the photographer there at the end of the reel of film, one of the earliest selfies. And you get this all the time at the ends of these rolls of films. You see like a photographer's shoes, or perhaps a pigeon feeding or something, where they're just using up all their last frames. But he shot this story on a night in the Blitz, I think it was 1941. And the picture post before the story is published never published the photographer's byline. Never gave him any credit, but in this story there's this, it's a bit too faint, but it says, from this rule of anonymity we accept these images. Because he risked his life, and then they gave him the credit, it's a wonderful spread. You see him first on the pavement here, and the next frame you've got him right up there, sort of with the firefighter in the action. And we also know, because of the biography, because we Bert Hardy was a great friend of the archive, and he was still alive, and that these pictures perhaps couldn't have happened, but because he was so shattered from the night before, he'd been up all the night with the firefighters, he left his negs in the developer, fell asleep, woke up, and actually that's what brought all of these negatives to life, because he was just shooting in such absurd light conditions. But because they were left in there so long, you actually see these beautiful, almost quite sort of abstract images, sort of silhouettes there. So I very much treat these images in three ways. I start as objects, and actually if you look at Carlton Watkins here, this image is by the photographer Carlton Watkins. So initially you have this print, and you can tell that it's an albumen print. So albumen was an emulsion, 19th century emulsion made from egg whites. You can actually make a really nice cheesecake from leftover egg yolks. I have the recipe. It also was shot on a mammoth glass plate. It's about 18 by 22 inches. And he was shooting before enlargers, so this would have been a contact print. And this was shot in Yosemite, so he'd be wandering around sort of this terrain with these kind of carts. I think he had about a ton of equipment. So you've got sort of the object down there, and then you look into the story the object's trying to tell. And these images here were really the sort of first instance of photography being used as an agent for social change. They ended up on the desk of Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the US Civil War, so he had things to do, he was a busy man, but they so moved him that he set the ball rolling to have the park protected in perpetuity. So it's the first real act of environmentalism that went through the US Congress. And then you just look at it purely from an aesthetic point of view. So one of the things that I love to do is to make these kind of juxtapositions, these purely just sort of visual juxtapositions, which kind of changes it changes the image, it changes the story they're telling. So you place the sort of a photo micrograph here. This is a tongue of a bee from 1890. And you place it next to one of the earliest pictures of the moon, and you've suddenly got the whole scope of 19th century photographic ambition, all there in just these sort of two images. The archive itself is still very much an industrious sort of one-stop picture shop. So we have here our wonderful drum scanner here. So sort of all these images, which I explained, would have gone out on the back of a bike along Fleet Street. Now they go on this sort of absurd-looking thing, a drum scanner. And we're still printing as well, so we still have a traditional wet darkroom. And I just love the fact that all these prints are now going out to other people's collections. They're going out to other curators and sort of being spreading these little sort of stories from the Holton Forth. And our conservation department as well is really crucial to us. That's a lot of images to look after, and sort of the older we get, the older the images get, and they need more care and attention. So this is sort of, our conservator is pretty much a sort of an alchemist, who's sort of a Lazarus figure, in which you can take this badly reticulated neg, soak the emulsion off the substrate, and then produce almost sort of a brand new glass plate again, and that's what ends up on your screen, which is a completely sort of magical process to me. And as a sort of, it's a funny thing being a curator without walls. So really sort of we do whatever we can to have our images out there in the world. I sort of like to send them forth to fulfill their little image destiny. So do follow us on Getty Archive. And if you are sort of in museums or galleries, we often do loans as well. We like these sort of prints to be out there and be seen, and to see them in new context as well. You know, they communicate a lot about the past, but also they can help us understand the present, certainly. And I think that's me done. Is that sort of good time? Is that all right? So thank you very much.